Well, let's bring in KCRA3 political analyst Kevin Riggs this morning.
Yeah, and Kevin, why don't we just start with the announcement about doing a virtual debate and then the president's near instant refusal of it?
Yeah, it's not surprising, to be honest. We expected that COVID-19 was going to dominate what was left of this campaign season. It certainly is with this. I had raised my own doubts about whether there would be a debate at all. And so the commission, as you heard, is trying to come up with some kind of a plan where they can do it in a very controlled and safe setting. Not surprising that the president would say at this point he doesn't want to do that because it really imposes, when you have a remote setting, obviously it imposes a real set of controls and restrictions that he doesn't like. We saw him in his debate last week where he constantly spoke up and broke the rules. And in a remote setting, he would not have as much freedom to do that. So how much of this is bluster at this point? Who can say? But certainly not surprising that at this point, the president does not want to take part in a debate that is remote in nature.
Kevin, let's talk about last night's vice presidential debate. Any clear winner in your eyes there? And if so or if not, how important was the performance of each vice presidential candidate there?
Well, I think, frankly, both sides did what they needed to do last night. If people were watching, looking for some sort of a mistake or some sort of a really glimmering moment of somebody who showed that they were not really up to the job, they did not see that. Certainly, Harris and Pence both showed a lot of competence. They both showed that they are really experienced with debates. And frankly, it was refreshing to see the two of them behave in an adult manner. And while there was some tension and obviously some distinct differences that were outlined last night, there was by and large a lot of civility and respect. And I think people got a lot out of the debate. Whether it makes a difference in the outcome, you know, it's hard to say. I think that Mike Pence was particularly effective on the issue of raising the possibility that if Biden gets elected, he'll roll back tax breaks that the Trump folks passed. That would be a very effective issue in some of the Midwest battleground states. Kamala Harris, though, was very, very effective on the issue of the pandemic, the handling of the pandemic, and also health care. Her line about if you have pre-existing conditions, they're coming after you. So both did, I think, what they needed to do, but I don't think a vice presidential slot really is what this race is going to pivot on.
All right, Kevin, thank you so much.